Hello, hello. Happy Monday, all. My name is Brianna Starbuck. I'm the Public Information Officer for the beautiful city of Glenwood Springs, and we are going to get started here shortly. It's about 2 till 5 o'clock, and so stick with us for just another couple minutes for more folks to join. I would say for folks who are here with us on Zoom, feel free to be popping in questions into the Q&A, and for our Facebook folks, feel free to pop in any questions there on Facebook as well, and we'll make sure to get them over on Zoom for our panelists to help get answers for you. But stick with us for just a little bit longer and we'll get started soon. Thanks. And we're here. Welcome all. My name is Brianna Starbuck. I am the Public Information Officer for the City of Glenwood Springs. Welcome to today's webinar. We will be discussing zoning reform and a couple of items going before City Council on May 16th. Welcome. I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Watkins to give us just a quick intro, and then we'll go through some housekeeping.
Yeah, thank you, Bree. My name is Watkins, and I'm going to do a more full introduction here in a minute.
Oh, Watkins, I think we need the room to be unmuted.
How about now? Can you hear me? No?
Good afternoon. This is the interpreter. Will you be asking or needing us to provide instructions on how to connect to the interpretation before you start with introductions or presentation?
Thank you. I think that was just me, but I think we're good to go. I think my audio settings were off, and we will turn on interpretation right as we get started.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Watkins. I think that was me.
Okay. Well, my name is Watkins again. Glad that you are all here with me. If you'll give me just a second, I'm going to queue up a presentation. And then we're going to, then I'll let you know all the things we're going to talk about. We have some housekeeping stuff to discuss first. And I obviously want to start us out here.
Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Watkins.
Sí, por favor. Well, I'll keep going then. So here we're going to talk, this is an information listening session about duplexes and lot standards. First off, let's have some instructions for how to get on Zoom. And I think Bree, are you going to describe this for us? You're muted, Bree.
You do all you can to just prepare your audio, and yet here we are. Thank you folks for joining us. A couple of reminders for Zoom. If everyone can go ahead and select your preferred language by clicking on interpretation, there's a little icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then you can select either English or Spanish. That is for our panelists and presenters as well to select that audio channel. And then as we go throughout today's presentation, feel free to type questions into the Q&A for folks joining us here on Zoom. If you're joining us on Facebook, you can type those questions into the Facebook comments, and I will pull those over into our Q&A for folks to get those questions answered for you. Additionally, at the end, we will be taking questions for folks who would prefer to speak out their questions rather than writing them in the chat. And so at the end, folks can raise hand, and then we will take questions that way as well here at the end of the presentation. So excited to have everyone joining us. Remember to select one of those channels, and we will get started here.
Great, thank you, Bree. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is first introduction. We're going to introduce ourselves. And then we're going to talk about ground rules and instructions, which we've kind of already touched on. This presentation, I'm going to continue with the content. Then we're going to have a photo slideshow. And then is going to be a question time that Bree just mentioned. So here tonight, I am Watkins. I'm the one speaking right now. We also have Emery Ellingson and Hannah Clausman. We are all in the Community Development Department, City of Glenwood Springs. We are all currently in the same room physically, but we have our cameras on with laptops so you can kind of see our faces. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to hopefully explain, explore. We want you all to leave with a good understanding of the issues that are going to be discussed at City Council on May 16th. Those two issues are duplexes, specifically proposal to make them a use by right, where currently they're allowed only by special use permit. And two, to change minimum lot standards to allow more subdivisions and multifamily units where they're already allowed. I'm also going to really briefly talk about or give you a glimpse about other changes related to housing that will be discussed in the future, but not on May 16th. And I'm not going to go into very much detail about those tonight. And then the bulk of our time tonight is going to be for questions from you all. You might have questions that hopefully we can answer and we can have a good discussion because really the goal is for the public to have an understanding of what will be proposed and us for also to receive comments and understand kind of where the public is on this. So to start out, we have here's a timeline and previous work that we've done. We've held a number of public meetings. This proposal for May 16th is really coming out of the strategic housing plan update that was adopted last year. And so throughout last year, 2023, we had meetings related to it. We had an open house at the community center. And so then a lot of public meetings at P&Z and with City Council. Most recent one was March 21st. So the recommendation that City Council is going to be considering on May 16th is to allow duplexes as a use by right in the RL and RM1 zone districts. Right now, duplexes are allowed in both of those two zone districts, RL and RM1, but with a special use permit. And I'm going to explain all of what that means. And I'm going to we're also going to help you look up your zoning if you're curious for what that is. That's all coming in a few minutes. And then again, the second thing on May 16th is a proposal to change lot standards to allow more multifamily units on lots that are already zoned for multifamily. So first of all, let's ask a real basic question. What are duplexes? Duplexes are two units that are attached to each other. But beyond that, there's some variation in what they can look like and how they can function. So duplexes can be owned by two different people, or they can be under one ownership. They can be condominiumized, which means that that's also about ownership. They're two separate units that have separate ownership. And then they can also look like lots of different ways. They can be kind of stacked on top of each other. They can be side to side, but we're going to explore that in the slideshow that's going to be coming at the end. I also want to differentiate that duplexes are different fundamentally from accessory dwelling units or ADUs. ADU is something an acronym I'm going to use tonight. ADUs, even though they are a separate unit and a lot of times they are attached to a home, we treat those differently. We treat those as basically something that is it is part of a single family home. So they're smaller typically than duplexes. If you have questions about really how they can be different, we might get into that later, but they are different. So we're talking about duplexes and not ADUs tonight. And then finally, something that can occur with duplexes is they can be deed restricted. That means that they might have restrictions on how much they can sell for or be rented for. And those are things that we could discuss that have been discussed in the previous meetings. I'm not going to get too much into that tonight, though. So when we talk about the changes to duplexes, what we're talking about is where duplexes are allowed in terms of zone districts and also with what process they're allowed. So on my screen, I'm showing a screenshot of our municipal code. which is how we determine what's allowed where. When you look at the screenshot, the top row you see are the zone districts that you see. Those are all the zone districts that you have. So if you live in the city, you live in one of these zone districts. I've kind of highlighted in orange the RL and RM1 zone districts because that's the subject of the change when it comes to duplexes. And so if you see the bottom row, it says dwelling two family, that means duplex. And right now, there's an S right there. That means it's permitted by special use permit. That is what we're talking about changing. Those two S's that are kind of underlined in blue would turn into P's, meaning that they would be permitted. So let's talk now a little bit about zoning. This is a screenshot from our zoning map. We do have an online interactive map, and I'm going to actually break from the presentation here in a second. So you can, and Emery here in the room with us is going to show you how to look up your zoning. This is a screenshot from it. So here, let me stop sharing. And then Emery, when he gets queued up, is going to share his screen. And we're going to walk you through how to look up your zoning once you get to the interactive website. Yep, so we can see your screen, Emery.
Okay, hello everybody. Actually the map behind me is what.
Well, I think you need to do your ears.
Apologies for that. Okay, so like I said, my name is Emery Langston, and as Watkins was pointing out, so you can see on this map back here, that's the entire city of Glenwood Springs with all the different zoning districts. And if you see the screen that is up right now, I'll show you how to get there to navigate to that screen, starting in the city website. And so here on the home page, you will go to departments, and then you'll hover over that and go over to, you'll see these three letters, GIS, and you'll click on that. And that brings you to another page. And what you will want to do is go down to where it says interactive maps. And then you have a couple options, but the one you will want to take a look at is the city of Glenwood Springs. And so you'll click on that, and it brings you to an image. So looks like we're loading here.
Loading slowly.
Lots of information.
It's coming.
And so what you'll see is a satellite, an aerial image of the city. And on the right, you'll see where it says layer list. And so these are all different sorts of sets of information that you can view. And the first thing, if you're curious about your own property, is you'd want to turn on this one. So Garfield County parcels, and you click that. In just a second for loading.
These are showing us our lot lines, approximate lot lines.
Just keep in mind that this is not a survey, but again, it's approximation of where those property boundaries are. And then the zoning districts, if you scroll down a little further, you'll see right here, zone district boundary. And if you click on that, then it brings up all the different colors. And so on the city of Glenwood Springs, if you see this arrow right here, you can click that, click it again, and it gives you a key. So it tells you all the different colors mean. And so, for instance, orange, that is RM1, residential medium density. And so that's subject to some of the changes that we're discussing tonight, potential changes. And then the other one type is this RL, this kind of yellow cream color. And now if you want to find a specific property, so let's see, we wanted to find the courthouse, you could search that, City Hall, and it will go to a location on the map, and you can see what zoning it is. And if the color, it's hard to differentiate by the color, you can always click on it. And it will bring up, first it will bring up sort of that parcel information, the exact property information. But if you click this little arrow here to continue, it will tell you what zoning district it's in. So you can see You know, you have the M2 mixed use district, and so you can see in this area, you have a couple different zoning districts. And of course, when you zoom out and you get the whole city, you can see all the different colors. So again, that's just a reference on the city website, where you can look up the zoning of your property, and two, you can always call in community development, we can confirm that for you, so.
Great, thanks, Emery. Can you unshare your screen?
Of course.
I'll go back to the presentation. Okay. Okay, so here we are again. Once you know what your zoning is. Technical difficulties. Try that again. Okay, now I can advance. So we know what our zoning is, so we can determine how this is going to affect your property or any other property you choose to look at. We've been talking about duplexes, so now let's talk about lot standards, which is the second of two changes that are going to be proposed and discussed at City Council on May 16th. So lot standards, if you think about duplexes and what we just discussed as where and what process is being allowed, lot standards are kind of about how many units, how much. Oh, have I been muted? Oh. One second. Okay. We'll get this right, I swear. Okay, so lot standards are kind of how many units are allowed. So it's not talking about allowing new uses, but just how much of what is allowed. Lot standards affect things like whether subdivisions are possible, and how much multifamily is allowed. Lot standards are a primary driver of how much density is allowed, and increasing the lot standard, changing lot standards can allow more infill development. You're seeing a screenshot, by the way, of a part of town that has some condominiumized units. And these townhouses that you see, the size of the townhouses, the number of townhouses that would be possible there are things that are determined by lot standards. And I'm going to try to advance my slide. There we go. So this is another screenshot from our zoning regulations. Again, we have zone districts at the top. You can see my arrow moving from left to right. These are zone districts. And so there are minimum sizes that have to be present in order for certain kinds of developments to happen. So let's say that you live somewhere like residential high density or the RH zone district where multifamily is allowed. Currently, you can have one multifamily unit for every 2,250 square feet of lot that you have. So if 2,250 times 2, that's 4,500. So if you have a lot that is 4,500 square feet right now, you can have 2 units or a duplex. And the math goes on, so it depends how big your lot is. You use that number to determine how many multifamily units are allowed. So this is what we're proposing changing. Some of these units changes that you see in red are numbers adjusted downward that would allow more multifamily units to be built, and this also affects subdivisions. If you have larger lots, there's minimum numbers that need to be met, and if you can divide them into 2 based on those numbers, then you can have subdivisions. So this would potentially allow some more subdivisions. I have an image here just of a 1913 back in Glenwood Springs. This is a plat that was created. All of these are lots that were platted. They're all 25 by 100 square feet, pretty small lots by today's standards, but in the downtown core area, you can still kind of see the remnants of these plans that were laid out. And you can see homes that were built on these small lots. And so this is, by adjusting it downward, we're kind of coming back in a way to some of these smaller lots, although it's not a requirement that lots be this small necessarily. So we just talked about two things that will change, or that are being proposed to change. Let's talk about what is not being proposed to change. We're not proposing changing any parking requirements. We're not proposing changing any landscaping requirements. City Council is not looking at changing any common open space requirements, any regulations related to building on steep lots. We have hillside development requirements already. We're not proposing changing anything related to design standards. So everything else is going to stay the same under the proposal that exists right now.
And if I can, Watkins.
Yeah, Anna, please jump in.
So we did have some questions that are coming in on the chat, and we'll be answering those, some in text and also some verbally live. One of the aspects that Watkins just touched base on is parking requirements. So when we're talking about this, for your knowledge, the city of Glenwood Springs does have parking requirements for duplexes currently, and that would not be changing for any proposed duplexes in this proposal or duplexes going forward. And so they do have off-street, so that means parking within the lot itself requirements when we're considering duplexes. So just wanted to point that out. And if you have specific parking questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and we can work with you on getting those answers throughout the presentation. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And just so everyone knows, the parking requirement for duplexes is 3 off-street parking spaces per duplex. So that's 1.5 space per half of a duplex. So here is the brief glimpse that I mentioned before about changes that may be considered in some form in the future, but not on May 16th, which is why I'm not going to go into very much detail right now about them. The city may look at changes to zoning regarding triplexes, changing the density bonus provisions that exist right now in code, reviewing a junior ADU concept, which would be a secondary and probably smaller ADU. So again, these are not going to be on the agenda on May 16th, but I wanted to let everyone online know about that. And there will, of course, if these do go forward, if and when these do go forward, there will be an opportunity, multiple opportunities more than likely for additional public comment and a public process before and during City Council's consideration of those changes. About to wrap up here. What we're hoping to get out of tonight is to answer your questions about these proposals. We are happy to hear any feedback from you all about how these proposals can be improved. We'd like to know if this webinar, which is a bit of a new format for us, is helpful for you all tonight. We are having this entirely online because we think that with people's busy schedules and childcare needs, our thought is that this is easier for people to join and participate. But if that's not the case, happy to know about that. Do you need more information about any of these topics tonight? We hope we can provide that information, but my contact information is out there and we can provide it again. And so we're happy to do that. So I'm going to break again from this presentation. Unfortunately, you have to hear my voice a little bit more, but I'm going to show you some pictures. That's what we're doing right now. Let's see, I need to change my share. Okay. Actually, hold please. I'm going to start from the beginning here. Sharing. Okay. So the way this is going to go, as long as technology will cooperate, is first I'm going to show you all several images from Glenwood Springs itself, several duplexes, to try to kind of show the variety of what they can look like. Some people I know have in their mind duplexes look a certain way, and they certainly can, but not always. And I'm going to try to not show any kind of identifying information about these photos that are from Glenwood. So addresses have been kind of blurred out, so you can't see that. This is one example of a duplex we have in Glenwood, and I'm gonna try to move on to the next one. Here we go. Here's another one that it looks like kind of a mirror image of the other. Here's another duplex image. This is what we would call stacked. So one is vertically on top of the other. And here is another duplex that, to me at least, looks quite a lot like a single family home, but is in fact a duplex and has 2 separate entrances. There we go, and a similar story here. This is a duplex that, to my mind, doesn't look very much like one. And a similar story here. Good amount of lawn, this one. As well here. And after this photo, we're going to transition into photos of duplexes from other places around the country. So here you see one, there's clearly 2 separate entrances, and these are 2 units side by side, kind of one building. This is another example of one that's vertically stacked on top of the other. Here's a 2-story duplex side by side, 2 separate entrances. Here's one that, to my mind, looks a lot like a single family home, but with 2 clear entrances to the street. And here are 2 side by side that are like that. And I'm just going to speculate here because I don't know. I would guess that both of these 2 structures you see here were built as single family homes, and somewhere along the way got converted into duplexes. Ditto for these. This one is also a duplex. You see only one entrance to the street. Although I haven't been inside this one, I would guess that the way this is set up is that there's kind of a foyer and there's an entrance to one unit once you go through the main door, and then an entrance to the other unit. There are 2 side-by-side duplexes. And here you see 2 entrances for the 2 units that are on the street. Other duplexes with 2 entrances from the street. There's an example of a newer duplex. You can tell this is a little bit more recent construction, side by side. And here we have kind of a more boxy, modern looking duplex. And here we have a 2-story also that's like that. Not sure where the dividing line is in between here, but we have quite a bit of space in this duplex, it looks like. And this may be the last image I have for you guys, another kind of garage facing type of duplex. Yes, this is the last image. So I am at this point done. And I think we can transition into questions now. I know my team has been working with answering some online. I've been totally oblivious to that.
Yes, thanks, Watkins. So we have been typing some answers to your questions in chat. And there are a couple that we'd like to answer live and verbally so that everyone can hear. And if you have more questions, please do send them in. Easiest to drop those in the question and answer icon at the bottom of your screen. So we do have one that has asked, how has this plan changed from the last city council meeting where you presented and received feedback from the public? And I will let Watkins expand upon this. He had a slide that did show quite a few of the components that have been a part of this proposal that's gone on for quite some time. So we've had Planning and Zoning Commission meetings as well, where they reviewed this. That was a public hearing where we also took public comment at that time. And we had some work sessions with city council where they were giving feedback, and we were also informing them of some of the public feedback that we had received. So some of those changes from the original proposal that came out of the Strategic Housing Action Plan, where we had hired consultants that were looking at a variety of strategies for the city to review. There was a suite of options, I guess is the best way to put that. We had numerous ways that the city could look at some changes to our zoning code and allowed uses. And that has been refined to what you're seeing today, which is the two topics of duplex allowance, where they were previously special use review, as well as some changes to the lot standard sizes. So where it began, there was quite a few more options that city council and the public saw and also commented on through the public survey. And I will look to Watkins to see if I forgot anything in that explanation. And thank you for the questions.
Yeah, no, that's great, Hannah, and appreciate the question because there have been some changes. Hannah mentioned that this process has gone on for quite a while. So what is different from November 16th? November 16th. There have been some work sessions in between then, but November 16th was the last time that the city council considered any kind of action on this. So what's different from then is that triplexes are not part of this. We're not looking at changing anything related to triplexes. One difference, density bonuses, density bonus provisions were part of that in November, and they are not now. No changes are proposed to that. And I think that's all that's different.
So we've answered quite a few questions in the chat. We did have someone request, and perhaps Emery, this would be for you to maybe go back to the zoning map. Can you please give examples of neighborhoods affected by this?
Great question.
And so we can certainly bring that back up and try and show on the screen the zone districts that we're looking to for those duplex changes, which are
RM1 and RL,
which is residential
medium. RM1 is residential medium density is what that stands for, and RL stands for residential low density. So Emery, would you be able to share your screen again with the zoning?
Yeah, and actually I'll share my screen, and then I saw another question in the comments about how would you even know? How would you know if there's a duplex in your neighborhood? So I'll also show another resource that you can use just to find out more about your neighborhood and what it's zoned and what structures are around you. So again, you can all see the screen. RM1 is, I'm sorry, here we go. RM1 would be all the orange areas, as you see here.
Orange,
so different neighborhoods, so you know,
orange, gold, burnt orange, whatever.
So that is RM1. And then the other zoning district is the RL, which is this color, this lighter yellow, if you will. So some areas near Linden, some of these areas, and then in West Glenwood as well. So those are the two zoning districts. Go ahead, Watkins.
Yeah, and so there's really not a lot of RL that we have, a lot of land that's zoned RL in the city. We do have quite a bit of RM1 though. So Emery, I was wondering if you could kind of move around on the map interactively, maybe not too fast.
Turn some of these other items off.
Yeah. So you can see a lot of it kind of around the downtown area and then especially west of downtown. But I think Emery can kind of walk us through and zoom in.
And we also have a request for the Park East neighborhood specifically, if that is somewhere in addition we'd like to zoom in.
Let's go south.
And these are great questions from all of you, and hopefully we provided some information that you can access on our website to also look at your own personal zoning of where your property is located and zoom in and out. It's a large map, so there is a lot of information there. And of course, community development staff is happy to have you show up at our office where we can further explain how to utilize this map, or you can always call us and we can check your property for you. We're happy to help with that type of information.
I think we're looking at Park East right now, right? So you see that kind of gold, yellow, gold color, that is RM1. And Emery, can you, I don't think any of these that we're looking at are RL, but could you click and identify some of the yellow cream colored ones?
Sure, so like, that's another color you see.
Yeah, so that RT, that's the zone district right there. What about the yellow one to the south?
That's RR.
Yeah.
It's not part of this.
But that orange that you see is RM1. And so you had another question, you were going to show us.
Yeah, someone else in the comments had asked how you look up a property, and this would be a resource that's on Garfield County website. But on the assessor's website, you can always look up a property by address, and then it will list the number of units that are there. So if it's a single family home, it will show up as 1 unit. If it's a duplex, it will come up as 2. And that's a resource that you can always search as well.
Yeah, you want to stop your share?
Yep.
And again, that, as we said, that is information provided through Garfield County and not through the city of Coconut Springs.
Great, so we have some other questions that have come in line. So we have a question regarding parking. Please compare and contrast duplex off-street parking to the current requirements in single-family dwelling areas. And that is a great question. For those of you who aren't familiar in code, we break up parking requirements by use type. So a single-family home is a use type, a duplex would be a use type, multifamily, so looking at additional units is also a use type. And then all of our commercial categories also have specific parking requirements for that use. And I will let Watkins do the compare and contrast of what is required for a duplex versus what is required for a single family home.
Yeah, so single family homes, if you're building a new one, you need to provide 1 off-street parking space. Again, that's off-street, that's a key point. Parking on-street, although we do that and it's important to have, that doesn't count for your parking requirements. So if you're building a new single family home, you have to provide 1 off-street parking space. You can provide more, but just 1. And that could be in a garage if you want it to be also. For duplexes, if you're building 1 duplex, i.e. 2 units, then you have to provide 3 off-street parking spaces. Again, those could be on a garage or on a surface somewhere of the lot, but 3 spaces. So that's the difference between the 2.
And continuing on, are setbacks being changed with this proposal?
I like the question. Someone knows what setbacks are. For anyone who doesn't, setbacks are also in code, and those are minimum distances that you have to have that can't be built on, except possibly by a shed and things like that, depending. But your house has to be set back a certain amount of space, depending what your zoning is. And to answer the question, no setback changes are proposed.
And this is an interesting one as well. Does staff have discretion to waive parking, design standards, setbacks, or otherwise compromise code requirements in single-family neighborhoods? This is I would say a complicated question, but a great one. So if you read code, there are sections that allow for something called alternative equivalent compliance, which is quite a mouthful, but it allows for a little bit of flexibility. It's not at staff discretion. It does allow for meeting the code requirement, but in a slightly different manner. So there are specific criteria for evaluating those requests. They're not very frequent, but some things that have come in have more to do with design, and that really allows new design concepts in an industry that is always changing, such as construction, that comes out with new and innovative ideas, to propose a new and innovative idea that meets the intent of a design standard, but actually exceeds it. in terms of benefit for aesthetic purposes and also form and function on the lot. So that is trying to summarize a pretty hefty section of our code, and I'm happy to further help anyone understand those allowances that are in code for flexibility, but not compromise. That's very clear in the intent that in these sections it is meant to exceed the base standard that is written in our development code and not compromise the intent of the code. Let's see, the next one. These are great. Would potential density bonuses alter any of these answers above? So density bonuses, as Watkins had mentioned, is not something that currently City Council will be reviewing at May 16th, but is part of the larger strategy options that came out of the Strategic Housing Action Plan that could be reviewed in the future. And those density bonuses have a lot to them that could be tied to affordability, design, location for transit. But that would be something, if was brought back for discussion, that would include more feedback and discussions with council. So really speculating on how that might change at this point might be a little challenging. And I'll let Watkins follow up with anything I might have missed there.
Yeah, so the question is, how might density bonuses change anything that's being proposed? Well, in its essence, density bonuses, as the name suggests, allows you to build more than you would ordinarily be allowed to. So I can't comment specifically on how duplexes might be changed without knowing specifically what density bonuses provisions would be changed. But what density bonuses do, as I said, allows you to build more. So I guess that is a potential way that this could, that density bonus changes could change what is being proposed on May 16th. I hope that's helpful. I hope that makes sense.
We had also several comments regarding the pictures that Watkins showed, which were examples of duplexes. And so these were merely examples of different pictures of how a duplex can look. Sometimes we get confusion between a duplex or a triplex or how they function on a lot. So those were purely examples. One of our questions is, where is the off-street parking in the pictures?
Well, for the ones that I showed you from Glenwood, because there were several in the beginning from Glenwood and then several from other places. So, and for the ones in other places, I do not know. But the ones in Glenwood, I believe they all had, at least most of them, I believe, had driveways. And they might have been driveways accessed from the front, from the street, but at least a couple of them had alleys. So that was alley access.
And to expand on that, for parking, as Watkins had mentioned previously, parking can take many forms on a lot. So parking in a driveway would be counted as a spot if it meets our dimensional standards. So a parking space has a minimum requirement for how wide and how deep it is. Also, parking spaces in a garage can count towards your parking requirement. And then there are also other configurations of parking that have parking that comes off of an alley in the back of a residence. That occurs frequently in our downtown area. So a lot of times when you look at a house from the street in our downtown area, you won't see immediately any parking. And it has specifically been designed that way so that the parking is occurring in the rear of the building. And in some cases that provides a nice view on street so that parking is kind of tucked behind. So a variety of ways that can be met.
And I think I'll put a little finer point on that too, and let you know that if someone is considering building a duplex and they can't figure out how to provide off-street parking, then they don't get a duplex. That would not be approved. We have standards that whether there's a public hearing for a special use permit, as is required right now in these two zones or not, or if it's used by right, either way, we look to make sure there's adequate parking. And if they can't provide it, then it doesn't get approved.
And the next question is a great one. Does this apply to existing duplex units or just new permits? So this is a great opportunity to remind everyone with code changes that this is going to apply to new applications submitted. It does not impact existing duplexes now. If you live in a duplex property, that would not change. This is just changing a small process review for some additional zones that don't currently have duplexes listed as a use by right. So current duplexes, no change at all. This is for new applications and new duplexes possibly with city council review. We have another question, and maybe this was answered with our process. Thank you guys so much for all these questions. These are great. Why did you drop the triplex provision? So as we discussed a little bit, this has been an ongoing process with numerous public hearings, work sessions with council. Our Planning and Zoning Commission also reviewed all of these proposals. And so every time you have a process that has multiple iterations with public feedback and Planning and Zoning Commissioner feedback and council feedback, things will change along the way. And so the triplex possibility was seen as something maybe to look at in the future. But the option for duplexes seemed less impactful to neighborhoods. And really that comes down to the key that duplexes are allowed in these zone districts that we're proposing. They just have a review process called the special use review. So this would just be changing that process so that they don't have to go through the extra review with our Planning and Zoning Commission. It would be reviewed at staff level. So the triplex, looking at triplexes and those possibilities are for future conversations, and that is something that was council directed and has to do with a comfort level of making these slower changes and not moving so fast on all these options. As I mentioned, we looked at a variety of strategies and council wanted to look at them a little bit more singularly and a slower approach to possible adoption. So that is why we have pulled back and are now kind of taking it a little chunk at a time, how you eat an elephant, I'm told, as opposed to bringing them all before council. Let's see. Just going through some of the comments. Great comments, by the way. We do have some interesting questions around what's called a PUD, and those are planned unit developments. And you can see where planned unit developments are on our zoning map. It's a specific district, and we do have quite a few in Glenwood Springs, and those are specific locations that have gone through a slightly different zoning and code process. So they have specific tailored requirements for their particular boundary. So I am thinking one example is the Cardiff Glen neighborhood. And you can see on the map that that's represented as a planned unit district. And what that is a PUD will have specific listed allowed uses and standards that are above or further than city code that was agreed upon at the time that that development came in. So this is not altering planned unit development governing documents. We've had several questions regarding that in those existing neighborhoods. And if you have a question, if your property is in a planned unit development, you can certainly give us a call or we can showcase that to you on the online zoning map. It's a teal color when you click on your property.
Good question.
We also have a question, and then I'll hand it over to Emery. How many lots citywide would be affected by these changes? And of those lots, what is the breakdown of vacant versus with residents on them? These are great questions. Have you done an estimate as to how many units might be generated by this strategy. And I think Watkins has a slide that we can go to showcase some of these numbers that help answer that question.
Yeah, let me get back to it. Your patience for a minute while I navigate to it.
And while Watkins is pulling that up, a separate question within this comment is, are ADUs allowed in a duplex? Which is something that I can answer. And so currently an accessory dwelling unit, which is what we refer to as an ADU, is only allowed in conjunction with a single family home. So currently, if there's a duplex on a property, it's not allowed to have an accessory dwelling unit. So hopefully that was a simple question to answer. And if that brings up other questions around that topic, feel free to drop that in the chat. So I will turn it over to Watkins for a little bit of the breakdown of lots that could be affected by some of these changes, and we'll go through those specifics.
Yeah, well, I hope you don't ask me to do too much math in my head. But here's a breakdown of the number of RL parcels that there are in the city. That's 41. So 41 total in the city. Of RM1 parcels, we have a lot more. We have 988. We don't have the information about how many of them are vacant versus built on, although I would bet some money that at least 90% of all of these are built on already, not close to 100. So those are big numbers, but when you look at them, remember that the vast majority, almost all of them, are already developed. And if that brings up more questions, we can go into this further. Anything to add?
No, that was great. And if people have questions about some of these numbers, so for the duplex change, as Watkins just mentioned, that's looking at 2 of those zone districts. So a little over 1,000 units, or not units, 1,000 lots that this would impact, of allowing a duplex to not be a special review. Duplexes are currently allowed in those 2 zoning districts. As I mentioned, it just has a process attached to it for special review that goes before our Planning and Zoning Commission. So in looking at possible impact, we also included some numbers about duplex development within the last 24 years. So you can see they're included on this slide here. So we tracked back to the year 2000. Since that time, so 24 years ago to now, we've had 47 duplexes constructed, and that's in the entire city. So citywide in Glenwood Springs, 47 duplexes have been built since the year 2000. So that means 94 units, because a duplex is 2 units. And we've further broken that down between the years 2000 and 2009. We saw quite a bit of that. The majority of those units, those duplex units, were built, and then a slower development period was seen from 2009 to present. And so that just also provides an outlook of what has traditionally been built, and that's citywide. This proposal for duplexes is only looking at 2 of our zone districts. So that just gives you a breakdown a little bit to give a baseline of what that development might look like, since we've had 47 over the last 24 years.
I'm going to unshare my screen unless we need to bring it up again.
Thank you, Watkins. And I think Emery had a question. No.
I
Answered it in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just going to take a quick opportunity here. Hi, Bree Starbuck, your friendly public information officer, enjoying the afternoon light coming in. Just a time check-in. We're right at 6 o'clock. We still have plenty of time to go through questions. Thank you so much for folks who have popped in a question into the Q&A or into the chat. We're working on getting those answered either over the chat or here in both. And so feel free to keep asking questions. In the event, we're going to try and get to everything. In the event we can't quite get to everything, we will finish writing those responses and they'll be posted to the website for this, which is cogs.us/zoningreform. So we're going to try and hit everybody. We have a couple dozen still that we haven't quite got to, but just in case, that's where all this information will live after this meeting. So thanks, and we can continue.
Thanks, Bree. And I'm really appreciating all the questions that you guys are dropping in. This is great interaction, and hopefully we're able to provide a lot of the information that prepares you guys to talk about this topic. And of course, I've mentioned before, community development staff welcomes phone calls in the office if you would like to talk to a person in real time, as opposed to on Zoom, or you can also visit our office. We're on the second floor of City Hall. And we are open from 7:30 to 5:30 p.m. Monday through Thursday. We are closed on Fridays, just as a reminder. Our next question is a great one, a little bit about the history of how we got here. Can you guys talk a little bit more about why the city is considering these changes and how this could help address the city's housing goals? And I will toss that one over to Watkins, as he has worked very closely with the consultants that worked with us on our strategic housing action plan.
Yeah, there is a lot of history there. How we got here. Well, I'll start with what Hannah was mentioning, which is our strategic housing plan update, which was adopted in 2023 last year. There were a lot of goals in there that related to this, and so goals and recommendations that were related to this. So one of the recommendations was to allow more density in in city limits where there is already urban development, and to consider it possibly with deed restriction. So there's been some discussion of that, but these duplexes obviously are not proposed for deed restriction. Our comprehensive plan that was adopted in also 2023, Hannah? Yeah, our comprehensive plan also has a number of goals and objectives and actions that relate to these things too. And I'm happy to go into the specifics if you want. So yeah, the question was the history and how we got here. I think this is kind of, we're considering this an outgrowth of our strategic housing plan update. It's supported in a number of other ways. I'll go ahead and mention other ways, I guess. Other projects and things that the city is doing. The city has made a commitment to Proposition 123. That was a statewide voter ballot initiative in, I believe, 2022 that has some requirements for cities that if the city fulfills them, it opens up a lot of grant funding to be available for housing. So it was a recognition that housing is a shortage of housing is happening statewide. And so to fulfill our commitments to Proposition 123, this is somewhat helpful. The city has also received a number of grants throughout the last 2, maybe 3 years, including one that funded the majority of our consultants and the work that we did for our strategic housing plan update. So that grant requirement didn't require that we make changes to our zoning code, but it required the city to make an effort to adopt some of the state's 16 best practices. They have a list of best practices, most of which we were doing already. But this work that we're doing is one way that we can fulfill those grant requirements.
I would say also, as Watkins mentioned, our comprehensive plan was a very extensive and long 2-year process with a lot of community engagement. And I see some attendees tonight that were very involved in that process. And we thank you for your participation in that, as it's a guiding document for how development continues into the future. One of the things that gets brought up a lot when we talk about this proposal, as well as the goals in the comprehensive plan that were identified and adopted, is referring to what we call infill development. And really that is highlighted in our comprehensive plan for a variety of reasons. But one of the main ones is it's efficient to serve. And what I mean by that is we have areas that can have infill development within our boundaries that are easier to connect to our services such as water and sewer. And so that ability to efficiently serve additional units within our boundaries is a goal identified in the comprehensive plan. And the reason why that's a goal is the opposite of infill is expanding borders. So expanding a municipal boundary and adding in new area for new development. But that is not always the most efficient to connect new water lines, new sewer service, and those new people into the community. So infill is a goal identified in our comprehensive plan and other strategic housing action plan as well, because it incorporates a smaller number of people within areas that you already provide services to. So I just wanted to highlight that as an additional goal that this is aimed at meeting. We've had a lot more questions come in, so we're gonna continue to get through them one by one. This is a great question around what is the current special use permit requirements? How many are allowed? This is a great question. I'm excited that someone asked about this because this is really getting at the big change on the duplex side. Watkins, would you like to answer that?
Sure. I'll try to explain the process while I pull up a slide that I have as well. So the current special use permit process it requires approval by Planning and Zoning Commission. And so that means a public hearing to build a duplex. That means you have to give us an application, and then there's about an 8-week period in which staff reviews it, creates a staff report, does the kind of review that we do for other building permits for things that are used by right as well. But so the process basically is quite a bit longer, involving that public process. Here I have pulled up, yes, it looks like it is showing. These are criteria of approval for a special use permit, kind of just so you're aware of it. There are 6 of them. We look at whether use will be compatible with the surrounding area, things that we look at already, which is, is it consistent with the purpose and intent of the code, municipal code, the zoning regulations. So this is what has to be met for approval of a special use permit, which is decided by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Great, and we have a follow-up question. So if you wanna, we can go back to that slide as well, or we don't need to. So it asks, please explain the benefit of the proposed change from the current process. And I will explain this a little bit. Watkins just showed you the steps and criteria that a special use permit has. A special use review, as he mentioned, goes to Planning and Zoning Commission and has a certain timeline attached to it. So currently in these zone districts, if you're wanting to build a duplex, you first have to submit a land use application and pay a land use application fee to the department. And that starts that 8-week process. And so we have planning land use applications for a variety of types of uses. Obviously, many of you are going to be familiar with some of our larger projects around town. Those are also land use applications that have a set process and set timelines. And so the change is removing something for a duplex that is widely allowed in town in other zone districts, but only these 2 have them as special use review. So it is a benefit to remove that process. It makes it easier for an applicant to come in and have a duplex use reviewed. The one thing I do want to point out, which a lot of people ask, is the review of a duplex without a special use review is the same criteria that is reviewed currently in the special use review. So those things that we've talked about, such as parking requirements, design requirements, landscaping requirements, all the requirements that would be reviewed under a special use review are also reviewed when that comes in other zone districts that do allow duplexes at the staff level here in community development. So we are as concerned with the criteria as our Planning and Zoning Commission is. So this makes a very low impact use. This is not high density. This is not medium density. This is one of our lowest density uses. So a duplex is as close to a single family use as you can get in our use chart. And because that impact is so low, it is perceived that it doesn't necessarily, with council review, need to have the special review permit process. And duplexes could be processed in these zones as they are processed in other zones with the criteria listed in our code. And I think Watkins would like to add on to that.
Yeah, just expanding on what Hannah said, the kind of general reason in theory that special use permits exist. We see them for things like marijuana dispensaries and commercial uses like like dog kennels, I guess. Things that could potentially be really impactful depending where they are. And so the requirement for a special use permit is for an opportunity to evaluate these things when there's a lot of variation in how they can be operated, when you really need to look at what the impacts would be because you don't always know for sure what the impact's going to be. That's the reason that special use permits exist. And so, you know, we've asked ourselves, are duplexes, do they have the potential to be really impactful and more so than a single family home? I'm not sure that the answer is yes. I'm sure reasonable people could disagree about this, but you know, in our mind, duplexes are not very much more impactful in general than single family homes are.
Great. So there was a lot of answers in there. Also getting to some of the other questions that have been typed into the chat. Here's a new one that's very interesting and also has been a topic discussed heavily during our comprehensive plan process. How has the city taken into account the increased water demands of an additional 1,046 residential units? So first I want to say the 1,046 residential units, thank you for doing the math on, that's talking about lots that could possibly add a duplex unit. As Watkins had mentioned, we don't have the exact statistic on what lots are vacant versus what lots currently have a single family home. But 1,046, this is referring to the lots that would be possibly able to add a duplex if they don't have one currently. The water conversation is a very interesting one that came up in our comprehensive plan, and our public works department and director did an extensive study on the water availability that the city of Glenwood Springs has in terms of water rights and where we access our water, and has specific numbers on the outlook for development within the city of Glenwood Springs tied to that about 20-year outlook that the comprehensive plan usually looks at. And what that study showed is that based on some numbers and math, which I won't get into here, but certainly that is information that we can provide to the public and have provided at other public hearings. The city of Glenwood Springs has adequate water to provide the expected numbers for infill development within our city boundaries. There's a lot of math and a lot of aspects on that document. I think it is a very lengthy document, but happy to discuss that with anyone more at length and also direct you to our public works department who holds that data as well. Great question.
I'd like to touch on a new question just right here that asks about how would design be for new duplexes? And again, so like we've mentioned, the potential changes, you know, a duplex would still have to meet requirements for parking. It would have to meet requirements for things like landscaping. And then another aspect of that is the city has residential design standards in code. And then there are even more specific ones for the downtown area. So that would be as far as the design and determining, you know, again, with like building height, transition to existing homes on the block, that would be part of the application for that duplex and would be reviewed. So that would be part of it, is meeting the design standards.
Great. We have another interesting one here that asks, why isn't council considering progressive housing policies like in Portland and Minneapolis, where fourplexes are used by right? So I appreciate that question. Someone obviously is following some national policies when it comes to zoning reform and uses. That's a hard question to answer, but what I will say is every municipality that are looking at these types of strategies to address infill development or gentle development is very unique to the needs of the community. Portland and Minneapolis obviously are much larger jurisdictions, and they went through a process very similar to what we're doing now, with public hearings and engagements to get feedback. And they arrived at their strategy with that feedback in mind. And where we have arrived currently through participation from people like you and also council feedback is that reviewing duplexes as a use by right is a nice gentle step into some of these strategies. So every municipality does need to figure out what fits for them, and it's not going to be all the same. So thank you for bringing up a couple of examples of what other jurisdictions are doing nationally. We are seeing a trend for allowing duplexes, triplexes, and in some locations, fourplexes as a use by right. That is not something currently that the city of Glenwood Springs is reviewing, but I thank you for your comment. And there are a lot of questions that we're trying to get through, so I appreciate your patience. And hopefully we're having some participation on Facebook as well. We have some questions referring to specific neighborhoods, and we are going to be taking some of these and getting back to you later if they're a little off topic or specific to a property in regards to parking requirements, which is not necessarily something that is going to change with these requirements. So if I don't answer your question verbally online, we will get back to you and try and address your questions as well. And some of these are about how many lots citywide would be affected. I think we've covered that. And here's an interesting one about public engagement, and I really appreciate your comments. We're trying to reach you where you're at, and hopefully you found engaging in this webinar is accessible. Hopefully you're enjoying this from the luxury of your home or your couch. This is a question of, are there any plans to do this type of webinar on a neighborhood basis if we get the neighbors together? How will people be able to comment on developments if the special use permit process no longer applies? So these are great questions. I'll take the first part of this on neighborhood webinars. Staff is trying to address a lot of the public engagement as much as possible and be as inclusive as possible while also respecting that public engagement does take up staff time to put on effectively so that we have access to the program, have interpretation if necessary. So we have looked at the possibility of trying to get to more people and on a neighborhood basis. At this time, we found that this format of opening it up to the entire community was more feasible for this time. But we, like, as I've mentioned before, we're more than happy to set up meetings individually, or if you'd like to have a group come in and speak with community development so that we can showcase maps and look at code and go into further explanations here in Community Development Department on the second floor of City Hall, if you desire. But we do not have any neighborhood-specific webinars planned at this time. To the second, how will people be able to comment on developments if the special use permit process no longer applies? That is a great question, and that is a change in this proposal. And what I will compare it to, the duplex changes are being considered in 2 zone districts, but duplexes are allowed in other zone districts without a special use review process. And they're usually less impactful. We don't hear a lot of comments from neighbors when duplexes come in. Anyone can come into community development and comment on a building permit that's happening in their neighborhood or next door to find out more information. But what we see in other zone districts that do allow duplexes, this is not perceived as such a large impact than if a large apartment complex was being located in your neighborhood. That's one of the differences when we refer to gentle density and infill. The impact in a neighborhood from a larger apartment complex requires more studies, and we certainly want to have more input available for those. A duplex, however, which you can consider to be two single-family homes that are attached, is not perceived to have that same impact. And so that would be one of the changes proposed. And we're happy to hear concerns or comments on that change. I am actually going to hand off some of reading the questions to some of my other planners as I need to take a breath and a small drink.
Yeah. Did you have one, Emery?
Sure, so I've just seen a couple questions that have asked about short-term rentals. So in general, short-term rental, you have to have a permit to do that within the city. And any duplex potentially, would be able to have one short-term rental permit of the 2 units. And then that would be only if the property itself was eligible and was at least 250 feet away from another short-term rental.
Thanks. I see one question in the chat. Do you expect developers to demolish single-family homes and build duplexes, as is happening in Aspen? That's a great question, and it's tough to answer. For the prospect of demolishing a home and building a duplex, first of all, it has to make financial sense, I think, right? You know, the cost of acquiring the land with a house on it, the cost of demolishing a house, and then the cost, obviously, of development of a duplex, that is kind of high. So there has to be a significant margin in between what you buy it at and what you sell it at. So that question is really going to be site specific about what specific properties is proposed for redevelopment, and then the kind of design decisions in the new duplex. So, you know, if I could hazard a guess citywide, and if this is just a guess, I don't know that the market right now supports very many of these kind of big redevelopments. What we might see a lot more of, though, or maybe not a lot, but some more of, what we expect to see the most of if anything, is conversions of structures. So not demolishments, not demolitions, like the question alludes to, but conversions of a single family home into a duplex, which involves a lot less construction. There would still be some impact fees that would be due to the city by creating a new unit, but that would be a much simpler prospect. And we saw some photos in the slideshow earlier of places that's happened.
I also see a question which has asked maybe just determining more what the difference is between a duplex and an accessory dwelling unit. So in the city, an accessory dwelling unit can only be a certain size. So it cannot be more than 55% of the primary structure, and it cannot be more than 1,000 square feet. And so the way that looks is, let's say you had a vacant lot and you wanted to build a single family home with an accessory dwelling unit. Let's say the main home is 1,000 square feet, the ADU could not be more than 550 square feet, 55%. If you wanted to go bigger than that, like let's say you wanted to build a 1,000 square foot unit attached to another 1,000 square foot unit, that would be a duplex. Or again, anything larger than that 55%. And so that is the main difference between the two, is size.
Yeah, size and kind of flexibility about how you design that. A duplex allows you to have 2 units be a little bit more comparable and be more significant. And in the kind of theoretical philosophy of it, if you will, ADUs, accessory dwelling units, are meant to kind of be subordinate to the main house. So the main house is kind of the main feature of the lot. That's what you see. And the accessory dwelling unit is something that is also present. It's less visible and hopefully less impactful on the intensity of how the lot is used. which is different from how a duplex would be. I see a question here. How were the neighborhoods chosen, specifically in West Glenwood? I see Cedar Crest, Cedar Crest Drive is included, but Greenway, Sunny Acres, and Oasis Creek are excluded. So the answer is that we didn't choose neighborhoods per se. We chose zone districts. Zone districts, in many cases, follow the kind of lines that you would think of for neighborhoods, but not necessarily. And so we chose the zone districts RL and RM1 because those are two zone districts in which duplexes are allowed right now. As we've said a few times, they're allowed, but you have to get a special use permit for them. And so we picked those two to make them a use by right and do away with the special use permit process. That's why we came up with those zone districts.
So we have another one here. These are great questions. And this one asks, how do people know that a duplex permit has been applied for? Oops, that just moved. Has been applied for, so we can comment or follow it. We seem to get notices after the fact when construction is underway. This is a great question of how process happens in the city. And so I will say, as I've mentioned before, there are a lot of zone districts that currently allow duplexes, so 2 units to be built without a special use review. And so in those cases, very similar to if a single family home was being built next to you, that's not something that the neighborhood is noticed of. Different from if you have an apartment complex, let's say for a 40-unit apartment complex locating near you, you would get a public notice in the mail that indicates what the land use application is and when that is going to a public hearing and which public hearing it would be, either Planning and Zoning Commission or City Council. So how our development code is organized is currently based on the number of units that someone is proposing. So if your next door neighbor, if you live next to a vacant lot in almost all zone districts and they want to build a single family home, there is no public notice associated with that development. And in some of our zone districts where duplexes are allowed currently, that is also not something that is a public notice requirement. In the change that is part of this proposal that you guys are looking at now, that would also change for those zone districts. So currently with the special use process, let's say the RM1 district, which is one of the zone districts that this is proposed for, if someone wanted to build a duplex, they would first apply for a special use review permit in the community development department. Our staff would review the permit, and if it was complete and had all the information, we would set it up for public hearing with our Planning and Zoning Commission. And then that requires public notice to be sent out to property owners within 300 feet of that property. So that is how currently a duplex being developed in the RL and RM1 would be noticed. That is a change. So if council decides to move forward with this, that would slightly change that process and would make it similar to duplexes in other areas of the city that do not include public notice. And there is a lot of complexity in public notification in our code for multifamily, duplexes, triplexes, and it changes based on the level of development. So again, if you are interested in what's going on in your neighborhood, or you want to check up on a building permit, that is always information that Community Development Department is happy to talk to people about and help them understand the zone district that they're in, what is an allowed use, and what that process looks like. So public engagement is an ongoing process, and we try and reach as many people as possible. So thank you for showing up and sharing your evening with us as we try and answer some of these challenging questions.
I am going back through the chat. This question was asked a while ago. I don't think we quite answered it, although it touches on some of the things we have talked about. Just want to make sure I understand. Currently zoned single family, is this purpose rezoning to change to allow duplexes for the area zoned single family, i.e. Sunny Acres and the golf course? So the way I would answer that is single family is allowed in all of our residential zone districts, and duplexes right now are allowed in all but one of our zone districts. RL and RM1, they're allowed currently, but by special use permit. And so there would still be one zone district in which duplexes are not allowed, only single family would be allowed. Hope that answers the question. Bree, did you have an announcement you wanted to make?
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Watkins, for that little plug for me. We're at about 6:30. We are thrilled with how many people have joined us, as Hannah mentioned tonight for this webinar. Getting some good feedback here in the chat. We still have quite a few questions that we have to get through, and so we're gonna stick to text questions for now. And so it looks like we've got a phone caller. So I have that phone number written down, and we'll have one of us give you a call after this to follow up. Or if anyone else has questions, feel free to be typing them into the chat, or same for anyone there in Facebook land, feel free to be putting questions in our Facebook comments, and happy to pull those over. And so we have about 30 minutes left for tonight. Anything that we don't get answered either live or in the text feed, we will follow up with an answer. And I'm just about to pop in community development's contact information, so you have all of the ways to get in touch with us. We are here to make sure everyone has the best information available as far as what this proposal means, or all things community development. And so with that, we will head into our last 30 minutes here.
Thanks, Bree. So we have a question that asks about height. So I will read this. Height is an issue. In Seattle, new duplexes go up high to fit on lots, and rooftop decks proliferate. Those that aren't redeveloping now have people staring down into their yard. Please carefully evaluate how quality of life of adjacent properties would be affected, especially people that have lived here a while and can't afford to move to get away from your proposed changes. So this is a great question, and it refers to our standards for approval. So every zone district within the city has a corresponding height standard, and this sets the maximum height that any building can go to in that zone district. And all of our residential zone districts have this as well. And we also have criteria in our code that talks about when, let's say, a 2-story single family home goes in next to a 1-story single family home in specific areas. So this is something that community development looks at very thoroughly with every application, because we do have standards in our code to protect what we refer to as building bulk and mass. So really, how the adjacent structure, how your neighbor's house feels when you're inside your house. And certainly our code points to an intent to trying to avoid something that's very large next to something that's very small. So we have a variety of standards that we look at when something is being proposed in that nature. So I appreciate pointing out this is a concern for people in existing neighborhoods with existing homes. It can feel intimidating if something is going up next door and you're not quite sure how tall it's going to be. So we do have specific height limitations for every single one of our residential zone districts that we adhere to, and that would be, this is adhered to whether it's a staff level review or a special use permit or something that council reviews. So thank you for that question about height. We have another question in the question and answer icon. That asks, has the city or anyone else looked at traffic impacts of this proposal? Another great question. You guys are hitting on a lot of the concerns that come up around all types of development. So what I will say to that is actually Watkins would like to take that answer.
Sure. Traffic impacts. Well, it's difficult to measure traffic impacts for something that applies in a really spread out area like this. Obviously adding more people can add more traffic. But I would also like to make the point that when you are adding more people, when there's more homes here in the middle of town, as opposed to more homes down valley of us, when they have to drive to get to Glenwood for their work or for whatever purpose, it's making it more possible for people to walk or to ride bikes who live here. So yes, there could be more traffic, but people who live here don't necessarily have the same kind of traffic patterns that people do when they're commuting through Glenwood or commuting to Glenwood. When people are commuting to Glenwood, obviously you would expect that they would be sticking mostly to the I-70 and Highway 82. So, more traffic possibly, also more opportunity for multimodal use, kind of more traffic in the network generally, as opposed to specific routes, would be my answer to that.
And also to comment on that further, this is a lot of code language, so I appreciate you guys all hanging in here. And this is what we do every day in reviewing some of these statistics. In terms of traffic impacts, we do have standards for traffic review with development permits and building permits that get reviewed by our engineering department. So depending on the number of units being provided, that will set a threshold for an applicant needing to submit a traffic report or a traffic study. So that kind of speaks to smaller developments versus larger developments. And our engineering department uses what's called the ITE book. And I'm trying to remember what that acronym stands for.
International, I had it. Transportation engineers.
Transportation engineers. So, and what that lengthy book breaks down is, again, how we have parking standards by different uses. Different uses also come along with trip generation statistics. So these are analyses completed on different types of uses, from single family, duplex, multifamily, and all of our commercial uses that give an analysis of how many trips are generated by each use. And those come in trips per day. And we also look at trips during peak hours of traffic. And I know anyone that lives here, peak hours of traffic is a very important factor for all of our lives. So that is a key factor that we review with different developments coming in. And again, our engineering department can probably explain that at greater length, but traffic is something that we review with each permit application that comes in.
And also just to follow up on that, as far as talking about traffic impacts, design, neighborhoods, if you have this neighborhood and you're on a block and you have really have specific questions about that block and what could it look like if these changes came through, I would encourage you to come into community development or give us a call and we could sit down with you. And if you had, okay, this is my block and I have 2 neighbors this way, 2 neighbors that way, what could happen here, with the zoning district and the size of the properties? Because some of that stuff where, we can really get into it with specific scenarios, maybe on your block, in your neighborhood, it'd be easier to sit down and explain that more in depth. So we just encourage you to come in if you have, if there's a specific lot on your block that you're wondering about. Because some of this stuff does get more into the weeds when you talk about, setbacks and all the other standards. So
I see another question about PUDs, and the question reads, is it legal to change the PUD in an existing neighborhood? As people buy into a neighborhood expecting a certain feel, having it changed seems unfair. Are we to expect more increase in density in the future as well? So there are very few scenarios in which the city could unilaterally change PUD. The government in general could change a PUD. Generally, no, changes need to be initiated by the residents themselves, and that process is usually outlined in the PUD itself. So this change does not affect PUDs. Anything to add?
I would add, there are some aspects of planned unit development that the properties within the boundaries of the PUD can elect to change for themselves. So that is a process that can be submitted. An example of this is a PUD that didn't allow chicken permits. So if you didn't know, having chickens within the city of Glenwood Springs does require a permit. But this particular neighborhood, their planned unit development stated that it wasn't an allowed use. And so they elected to go through the process, and it requires gaining a certain percentage of signatures from the properties that are within that planned unit development, and is a process that the property owners within that planned unit development can elect to change. So that's something very specific and is a little bit of a process, and the consensus needs to be reached within that neighborhood, and obviously compared for what's legal to do in that. But it is a process that's open to planned unit developments to change themselves. So we do experience planned unit developments that have come into the city maybe a long time ago that didn't envision such things as accessory dwelling units or short-term rental permits, and they want to update their standards. There is a path in order to do so, and anyone interested in something like that for any area in the city that's under planned unit development, certainly we're open to meeting with you to discuss how you can possibly move forward with something like that. So I use the chicken permits as an example that's maybe easy to understand, but gaining consensus of the neighborhood that has those governing documents is key.
Another question is, discussed that these new changes protect housing for people employed in the greater Glenwood metro area. The concern is that we wind up creating housing which works mid-valley to Aspen. So if I to interpret that, are we going to be creating opportunities for housing that doesn't house Glenwood workers, instead houses workers from the mid-valley or Aspen? It's a great concern. And when these are free market units, obviously anyone can buy them. Anyone who works or doesn't work, wherever they choose to work or don't work. A way to control this, and in this way, deed restrictions has been in other conversations, both part of the zoning reform discussions that have been happening over the last year and in other places. Deed restrictions are one way to try to ensure that the housing that is created is for certain people, certain members of the local workforce, for example. So that's an option that's out there. At this time, the recommendation for greater allowances of duplexes would not mean that they're specific to the local workforce. This would allow duplexes to be developed at a free market, and so they could be bought and occupied by people in Glenwood workforce or not. What we hope is that there's some gentle density increases with this that increase the housing stock, increase options, maybe bring down the cost a little bit by the increased inventory, and that those options are here in Glenwood and convenient to use and for people that will add to our community.
So I saw, looks like there's a question asking about what does administrative staff review include? And so if someone wanted to build, let's say, a duplex, they would be required to submit a building permit. And so the building permit is a set of plans. It shows where the structure would go, how is it going to be built. In addition to that, it would also require either a drainage report or a drainage letter. And what that is that's a study coming from an engineer that explains how drainage would work on the property. And so that wouldn't adversely affect other neighbors. So the building permit process usually is 6 to 8 weeks for approval. And anytime a building permit is submitted, those plans are public information and are available for viewing at Community Development Office or online via public records request for the items that have been submitted. So that is, when we talk about when something is administratively reviewed, that is the process, is the building permit process.
Question, do any of the local duplexes shown in your show, and I guess my slideshow, meet the requirements proposed in the zoning reform proposal? Tough to see without seeing the plans for them, a plan view of all the elements that we look for. But they look like it, at least from the photos themselves, from the street view. They're looking like they meet our design requirements, which involve having a certain amount of kind of architectural features. So we're not looking at blank walls. Parking kind of depends on it, but it looks like they might. So it is possible and likely that the photos that were showed meet the requirements.
I saw a question. We've had a lot of interest regarding the golf course itself. So this question is regarding the golf course. And it states, in November, the golf course is zoned as single family. What are you proposing now? So I'm not sure what November is, but the golf course is zoned as single family. What are you proposing now? So something that's very insightful if you go to your zone district within our code is it has an intent statement or the purpose of that zone district. So currently the golf course is zoned RL, which is our residential low density. And I will read to you the intent that's listed in the zoning code for clarification. The purpose of the residential low density district. The RL district is intended to accommodate low density, primarily single family residential uses. This district can be used as a transitional district between large lot rural development and medium density residential neighborhoods. So I read that purpose statement, and we have purpose statements for all of our zoning districts that are stipulated in code. It mentions primarily single family zoning. But if you look at our table of uses, duplexes are a special use review. So duplexes are allowed through a process currently with the zoning that exists over the golf course. In order to propose a duplex there, this is a very large property, it would need to be subdivided. Otherwise, you're looking at one duplex on the roughly 30 acres, correct me if I'm wrong on that, of the property as it's one parcel. So to create more duplexes, a duplex is occurring on one lot. And maybe that's a definition that we can send out. We have definitions for all of our uses within code, and duplex is defined as 2 units occurring on one lot. So for the golf course currently, which allows duplexes through a special use review, in order to do that, they would need to subdivide that large parcel into however many lots they wanted duplexes to occur on. But we're not looking at multiple duplexes on one lot. That is a different category within our zoning code. So if more than one duplex wanted to locate on the golf course currently, it's a subdivision process, which is a whole other process within our zoning code that has public notifications and requirements attached to it. Hopefully that wasn't more confusing and then it was helpful, but happy to answer more questions specifically around that. If anyone wants to call community development and talk about a specific property, whether it's the golf course or your own property, and what this has implications for, if you'd like more information.
And I guess just adding a second piece to that is all of these changes would be the changes to zoning. They don't make a property owner or force a property owner to do something on their property. So if I live in a zoning district that allows duplexes, it doesn't mean I have to go build one. I can have whatever exists there. So again, if someone wants to do something with their property, that's where these changes will come into play. And then it looks like there was just another question about what is the maximum square footage for a new duplex? How big could that be? And does that vary based on zoning district? And that's a good question. And that comes back to how big can, in addition to a single family home be? What can I build on my property? And again, that comes back to when you have a zoning district, you have setbacks. And so that's how close to a property line in the front, the rear, and the side that you can build to, and then also the building height. And so a maximum square footage for a new duplex would be determined by how big is your property? What are the setbacks for that zoning district? What are the height limits for that zoning district?
Yeah. Next question. Did I understand correctly that one of the driving forces behind the duplex by right is to build up the current properties that are supported by infrastructure versus future city investment and cost to develop on properties that have not been developed? So it sounds like the question is one of the purposes of this proposed change to allow more development that's currently supported by infrastructure versus vacant properties. I think I'm summarizing that. So yes, that is part of the reason. Hannah was talking earlier about infill development. Infill is development that is occurring within the existing urban fabric, as opposed to greenfield development, something that's vacant on the outskirts of town. And so yes, there are real reasons that infill development in many cases can be better than greenfield development, not least of all being the cost to serve. Development always is site specific, of course, and subjective. One person's duplex that is a really nice addition to a neighborhood is not necessarily perceived the same as someone else, but that is certainly part of the motivation.
We have another question that I might ask the attendee to clarify. It states, have any properties that aren't already neighborhoods been considered for the housing issue instead of changing our current neighborhoods? The clarifying question that I have is perhaps maybe an example of what you would consider that something that isn't a neighborhood. So would love to answer that question for you. A little bit of background is let's see here, we might have had just a quick language transfer over. Let's see if we can try and fix that. One second while we try and address this technical difficulty.
Hi, Dea. This is Brianna. I think you maybe need to select Spanish on your end.
Thank you, Bree.
I think we're good.
Okay, sounds like we're good. Thanks everyone for hanging with us while we work out some of these kinks. And thank you so much to our interpreters in Spanish that are providing all of these lengthy questions and answers on the Spanish channel. Again, if you've joined us and you would like to listen to this in Spanish or have questions in Spanish, you can select the language that you'd like to hear this in on the bottom of your screen. Spanish will take you to the Spanish channel, and English, you'll be able to hear the English that's being spoken on the English channel. So we were discussing, have we looked at other neighborhoods versus changing existing neighborhoods? And where this started was a variety of strategies that our strategic housing action plan was looking at based on goals that the city wanted to set regarding reducing traffic in town, providing housing for employees within Glenwood, being two of those. And so we have looked at a variety of strategies that touch all aspects of the city and trying to work towards the ones that work best for the city of Glenwood Springs. with input from the public, such as tonight. So appreciate you bringing out your concerns and your questions. And on that one, if you want to clarify what you mean by something that isn't a neighborhood, or want to ask a different question, feel free to throw that in the chat.
Here's a question that actually goes back a while in our meeting. Did the results of the public survey support duplexes? I think the public survey being referenced is a survey that was conducted in August and September of last year. There was an online survey that asked the public questions about duplexes, as well as triplexes, as well as density bonus questions as well. So it covered topics much more broad than we're considering at this moment. Did the results of the survey support duplexes? The results generally, they were kind of mixed. The results for 2 zone districts, RR, which is not under consideration tonight, was in favor. I believe the results for RL were in favor. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe the results for RM1 were also in favor of it. None of them by really significant margins, though, I would say. So another question that kind of goes back a while in the meeting. Sorry, we're just getting to it, but with multi-generational families in a single family home with multi-adults with cars, how is the off-street / on-street being dealt with? So I think this is a parking question. I think the question is what can be done, or what does the city zoning requirements do with regards to single family homes that have multiple people living in them. And so the answer is we don't really look into, we don't have requirements for how many people can live in a single family home. We're not going around counting people that live in homes, counting cars either. When new development happens, we have certain parking requirements like we've discussed. You have to meet a minimum number of, provide a minimum number of off-street parking spaces. And you can provide more, but we don't require that. So I would say that when there are multiple people in a single family home, it would be a best practice on their part to have the corresponding off-street parking.
I think I would add on to that a little bit, because these are questions that we receive in community development with people that have concerns about parking, the number of cars on their streets or in the neighborhood, and what we refer to as on-street parking. So that's the public parking that happens on streets. Some of you live in neighborhoods that have marked parking that occurs on the public streets, that is open to anyone to park in based on, some have 2-hour limitations. Some other parking areas in our residential neighborhoods don't have posted parking limitations, but there are standard duration requirements for parking, which is 72 hours in most of our neighborhoods. So there are protections in place that our code enforcement that lives in our police department work with to enforce parking. And many of you may have seen our code enforcement staff out and about within the city enforcing our parking requirements on the streets or in the timed areas downtown. And if you have concerns, that is certainly someone that you can call. If, occasionally we have trailers or cars that get abandoned or might be forgotten and left a little bit past, a 72-hour mark, or in the downtown in the 2-hour mark. We do have enforcement within our police department that's trying to upkeep that for the entire city. And they do a great job with the resources that they have. If you have concerns regarding some of those aspects of what's allowed within your neighborhood and how you can help enforce that or work with community development, we're happy to field those calls. Code enforcement in our police department is also very helpful in explaining some of these aspects that we have different zones throughout the city with different standards. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how on-street parking works for everybody. It is a public amenity to be able to park on the street, but the city does try and manage that so that it's not overwhelming in particular areas. And we continue to try and work on that. So thank you for your comments around parking. We know it is a great concern and will continue as such.
So the time is 6:53, and we are going to reserve the last few minutes from now until 7 o'clock to kind of recap what's being proposed on May 16th. So if you have any questions, please get them in right now. Unless I'm mistaken, I think we only have about one question left, which actually is kind of clarifying what we discussed earlier. Empty land within the city, that goes back to the question of, are we considering making changes to neighborhoods that aren't established yet as opposed to existing neighborhoods? And to that, I would say that all land in the city has a zoning designation. And so the fact that their vacant lots aren't zoned as vacant, they have a zoning designation that's shared often with what's around them. And so it would be any changes to zoning that affects one zone district would affect all lots equally within that zone district. Hopefully that answers the question. You seen any more questions that need answering?
I think we're good. If we haven't answered your question, as Bree mentioned, we'll try and get that to you in writing. And
I see one more.
okay.
Sneaking in. On average, how much longer would it take to get a special use permit approval versus a by right permit approval? So in other words, the question is, what's the difference between applying for a special use permit versus turning in a building permit? So about 8 weeks longer on average, because you will have to get a special use permit, you will have to turn in your plans for land use permit. And then after you get approval, hopefully, you would turn in your building permit. So it's an additional process in the beginning, kind of additional red tape. Question, why was that survey you mentioned not mailed? Good question. It's maybe something that we should do in the future. It was all online. Online works for many people, but obviously not all people. And I guess one kind of negative about mailing surveys is that they go to property owners usually. And there can be renters that live in a home. There can be multiple renters that live in a home. Of course, it's good to have multiple ways to answer a survey and not just one. So that's good feedback.
And Watkins, I'll add on that. I mean, we are always trying to improve our community outreach and engagement, and each process looks a little different, and we continue to refine it and look for ways to connect with folks better. We've got a myriad of platforms that are online, but for folks who are not online, we also post things here at City Hall, making sure that survey, the survey was sort of a secondary question, but putting things in the paper and on our radio stations. But the best way to get sort of the latest and greatest on all things outreach and community topics and things like this webinar tonight would be to sign up for our city emails or text messages that'll come right to your inbox, and then you won't miss anything. And you can do that on our website at gwsco.info. And we're always trying to do better and reach more folks. When we do surveys, we try and have paper copies of surveys available here at City Hall as well for folks who prefer not to do computer. And so we're learning. Thank you for extending grace to us as we continue to look for ways to improve our processes. And with that, I think that we are at our last 3 minutes. If we can summarize one more time what's going to City Council on the 16th, and ways that people can connect outside of this.
So I'll take that one then. And yes, I am sharing. So at City Council on May 16th, that's what this event has been in preparation for. There will be 2 topics. One is allowing duplexes in the RL and RM1 zone, changing the zoning regulations to make them a by right use as opposed to allowed by special use permit, which is what they are. And the second change or set of changes is regarding lot standards. So there's a chart that you're seeing here and that you'll see in the information packet for city council that would allow more multifamily lots to be developed where they're currently allowed. So not changing any uses here, but allowing more subdivisions and allowing more units in some of our zone districts. And I think that summarizes it.
I think to close out, we appreciate everyone who spent this time with us tonight. There was a lot of great questions, and we continue to want to hear your feedback on this as for the upcoming public hearing, as well as in the community development department. This is part of our team, Watkins and Emery, our planners. We have other staff that's helpful regarding a variety of issues that you guys have talked to tonight, from parking and height, and it is what we do every day, and we're happy to talk to you about it more. So come and visit us if you have more questions. You can also email or call us. And just thank you again. This was really a great interactive session, so appreciate it very much. And with that, I think we will give you back your evening.
Woohoo! We did it! Thanks everybody. Tonight's recording will be posted to the to our website, which is gwsco.info. So look for that there. We will wrap up for tonight. Please reach out with any additional questions, and we'll see you in the neighborhood. Bye-bye.
Thanks.